We all have our fond memories of the games we played most in our youth. These games are often the very essence of comfort, easily picked up and played at any time, that old muscle memory kicking in instantly and pure bliss following soon thereafter. This episode is covering my favorite 10 Sega Dreamcast games. Whittling this list down to just 10 was rather difficult, but I have no problem presenting each and every one of these as some of the best experiences on that system. Let's keep the dream alive and look at my top 10 Sega Dreamcast games. Before we begin, I wanted to look at a handful of games as honorable mentions. These are the games that I nearly put in the top 10, they were so profoundly important to my Dreamcast experience. First up is Mark of the Wolves. Since I didn't have access to this game on a Neo Geo, the Dreamcast edition was as close as I could get at the time. I loved the animation and gameplay of this one, and quickly adjusted to the changes and deviations from the source material. I still consider it a hell of a good fighting game. Next up is the NFL 2K series of games. Sega had fallen so far in this area during the life of the Sega Saturn, and it was so good to see them rise back up with this kind of quality. The graphics and presentation were second to none at the time, and I adored the gameplay. Sports games do not often get the respect of other genres in the retro gaming community, but these games are definitely among my favorites for the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was a powerhouse system for fighting games. You didn't have to look hard to find some good ones, and a top 10 episode could be easily dominated by the genre. Capcom vs SNK 2 was among those games for the system that deserve such praise. The multifaceted groove options, the huge list of characters, and the single and tag team options all made this one a winner. It definitely stands as a Dreamcast classic, and a series in terrible need of continuation. I also wanted to give a special shout out to the Yu Suzuki GameWorks compilation. It contains 5 Superscaler classics from the 1980s. Each game has been lovingly presented with pictures of their arcade cabinets, a little technical information, and the game itself. You get Space Harrier's great shoot-'em-up gameplay, Outrun's timeless driving time attack challenges, Power Drift's roller coaster-esque kart racing, Hang-On's motorbike racing thrills, and Afterburner 2's high-speed aerial acrobatics. These games were razor-sharp representations that ran well and played great with the DC's analog pad. Sega needs to bring this out on modern systems and continue the series with more great Yu Suzuki games. Finally, I must mention Resident Evil 2 and 3 for the Dreamcast. Coming off playing the PlayStation version of these two games, I was hooked again thanks to the improved visuals and the fact I wanted them on my Sega Saturn so badly. They were also budget releases, making them cheap additions to the great Dreamcast library. Sometimes a game just comes along and nails what people are looking for. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was one of those games. The first one had been a great continuation of the Versus series by Capcom, and Part 2 added even more characters, 3D backgrounds, and tons of new moves. The arcade original was done on Sega's Naomi board, so the Dreamcast home version was pretty much spot on. It's an incredible multiplayer game too, sure to give your friends and family hours of fun. Many of you are aware that I'm a big fan of gun games. I always felt they made great co-op multiplayer experiences, and Confidential Mission did just that. Taking the formula of Virtua Cop and wrapping it up in a spy thriller theme, fans of Sega's previous efforts should feel right at home. Like many of the arcade games that came home to the Dreamcast, this was a Naomi game, and again it's pretty much perfect. The Dreamcast would get a number of games that appeared on the PlayStation first. Most of the time I just skipped these unless they had big differences in content or visuals. I was so busy with my Dreamcast when it was first released, I missed Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver entirely on the PlayStation. And man was I glad that happened, because it would go on to be one of my favorites for the Dreamcast. The revenge story was truly epic, and I loved the desolate world that felt lonely, sad, dreary, and threatening all at once. Of course, the Dreamcast version also looked better and generally ran at a higher frame rate. Soul Reaver 2 was in development for the Dreamcast when Sega pulled the plug, leading to its cancellation. The Dreamcast wasn't really known for having a ton of RPGs, but when it got a good one, it was typically top shelf stuff. Grandia II was the sequel to the classic Game Arts original that never saw a Sega Saturn release outside of Japan. Luckily for us, the same fate did not befall this one. I was pretty much drawn to every aspect of this game from the moment I played it. The characters were appealing to downright lovable, the graphics were solid, the music great, and even the story was fun to unravel. I was so sad to see it end once I beat it, so I started it right back up to experience it all over again. I won't BS you guys, when House of the Dead was released on the Sega Saturn I was disappointed. While the game played well enough and was a blast with 2 players, I was always bothered by the completely butchered technical aspects of the game. I completely reject the notion that this game stressed the Saturn hardware so much that this was the best it could do. Instead, this was purely a byproduct of limited resources and a shortened development cycle due to Sega's own lack of confidence that the software was going to be a worthwhile investment. House of the Dead 2 would be a reckoning of sorts. Coming directly from the Naomi arcade version, it's pretty much perfect, looks fantastic in technical terms, and is again a top-notch 2-player co-op experience. I can't stress enough the fun this type of game has when friends are with you. They can be as engrossing and competitive as a fighting game, and the multiple pathways and endings even ramp up the replay value. It was a special time to have such an accurate arcade to home conversion.
Kill me! No! No! Help me! Help me!
Thanks. You can get outside that way.
You don't usually find Border Down among the elite list for the Dreamcast. Games like Ikaruga will usually fill the shoot 'em up prerequisite. But I love this game's unique system. There are 3 parallel systems going on behind the scenes here. You start in the green border, which is your default path for each stage. Make a mistake though, and you'll border down into the yellow, which can feature different enemies, patterns, and can even take you on a different path. Die again and you're in the red border fighting for your life, where it's possible that you can face a game over. I always dug the presentation of Border Down. While it has 3D backdrops, it mainly uses them for aesthetics, and the gameplay remains traditional, horizontal scrolling goodness. Much of its development team is made of ex-Taito employees, and since it's a Naomi arcade conversion, you know it looks and runs excellent. The Dreamcast also has remixed stages and music should you want some variety. You guys know Shenmue. Its living open world was truly stunning in 1999 at its Japanese launch, and even the next year everywhere else. Some asshole named Lan D shows up, demanding the ancient dragon mirror, whoops your ass, kills your father, and then walks away like he owns the damn place. This sets you loose on an adventure to get revenge for your dad, recover the dragon mirror, and find out what it was all about. You'll get sidetracked with all kinds of little tasks and missions, but in the end you'll love every minute of it. It's definitely a product of the 90s, complete with bad voice acting and a script that can be hilarious at times, but even so, this world is definitely engrossing and you'll want to see it to its very end. Every so often a game will come along that will be so refined, so full of content, and so well made that it will put its source material in the arcade to shame. This did not happen often, but it did with Soul Calibur. On a technical level, it destroys the visuals of the PlayStation-based arcade version. Better models, textures, backgrounds, and special effects, it's a generational leap. Namco could have stopped right there and this game would have been awesome, but instead, they add a ton of extras and unlockables to the mix, giving us near infinite replay value. It quite simply is the blueprint for all modern AAA fighting games, and still manages to put many of them to shame. It's the highest rated Dreamcast game of all time, and certainly deserves to be considered among the best games for the system. If you are a fighting game fan, Soul Calibur is a must on the system.
Battle 1, fight! This victory strengthened the soul of Voldo. You win!
As a big fan of the Resident Evil franchise, I was really disappointed the later games didn't get a chance on the Saturn. This of course made the release of Code Veronica a big event on the Dreamcast. It was an exclusive Resident Evil experience only available on a Sega console at that point, adding to its allure. And it mostly lived up to my expectations in a big way. It was graphically impressive, with great textures, models, and environment detail. The story was particularly wacky, taking the Resident Evil formula further than it had ever gone, with truly demented characters and terrifying new monsters. The areas you explored had some pretty good variety, and the addition of returning characters really made you care about what was going on. You can now get this on many other systems physically and digitally, but in 2000, the Dreamcast was the place to be for Resident Evil goodness. The original PlayStation library will often dominate any RPG discussion when it comes to the late 90s and very early 2000s. While that in many respects is well earned, it also means that a game from that era is often overlooked, and that game is the Dreamcast classic Skies of Arcadia. I was a big fan of RPGs, so this one was on my most wanted list for a long time. When it finally landed in late 2000, I was treated to one of the best games I had ever played. But why was it one of the best? Did it have some unique battle system that blew away your more traditional RPGs? No, not really. While it did have two really cool battle systems of character versus character and ship versus ship combat, it was your pretty standard turn-based systems where elements were used for strategy. So then, it had to be incredible graphics, cinemas, and presentation that just decimated everything else on the market. Again, no, not really. While Skies of Arcadia had a great art style, a unique world, and certainly was an attractive game, I can't say it put to shame games like Grandia II. What the hell was it then? What made this game so memorable and fantastic? It was the incredible story and characters that were the difference here. These characters were as likable and as lovable as any fictional video game characters could possibly be. They genuinely cared about one another, and you cared about them. They grow from simple children to having the entire world in their hands. They learn lessons of friendship, revenge, forgiveness, and responsibility for each other during their journey. You never feel lost or having to guess what is going on like many RPGs. This story is about growing up, finding your own way, and making sure the people you care about are always at the center of your life. No RPG I have ever played before or since does this as well as Skies of Arcadia. It's a game about characters having character, and that's something all too often lacking in these types of games.
Let's try this!
So there we go guys, my favorite Dreamcast experiences. This system was so short-lived yet so full of stuff to play, your list will likely be quite a bit different from mine. But one thing we can all agree on is that the Dreamcast was a hell of a ride while it lasted. Many of the games I showed here are compatible with the VGA box and look absolutely stunning on it even today. Most of these also have alternative methods of playing them, such as remasters and other console ports. Back then though, you could only play these in one place for a while, and that was the Sega Dreamcast. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.